Hello, everyone. Welcome back to our next part two episode of The Philosophical Liberal, where we are continuing our exploration of the Renaissance human ideal in not so inspired a location this time, not with all the beauty of Italy or the outdoors behind us, but I think we're still going to have a very inspiring conversation because there's still so much on this concept of the Renaissance human and why it matters, why it's an ideal, why its connection to philosophical liberalism, and just in our own personal lives as entrepreneurs and as human beings who want to achieve freedom, flourishing, and greatness, why we think being a Renaissance human is so important. So I'm really excited that we're going to have this opportunity to continue this conversation, draw out some of these further distinctions, and I think there's even going to be a bonus either attached to this episode or shortly thereafter, where Chris is going to share with us some of his inspiring sights and images and ideas that he generated from that trip. But I will turn it over to you. And if people saw our previous episodes, so this is the part two of the Renaissance human ideal. So if you haven't seen part one, probably do go back and check out part one first. And when you see that one, if you recall it, you will have noticed that unfortunately technology was not so perfect during our recording. And unfortunately, Chris dropped off that call. And I ended it, but so there's a lot to pick up with. So I'll be curious even to let you build upon what you weren't able to say as you got dropped off the call.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for that, Joy. And yes, apologies for forcing us into a two-parter. But, to be honest, there was so much to say on this topic, we probably would have
We
done
were planning a
even
two-parter anyway.
even without it. Although it did prove my loss of Wi-Fi and cell connection in Florence did probably prove one of the points that we were making that for all of its beauty and glory from its historical epoch, there were many, many things to be desired about the modern world in contemporary Italy, and technology being one of them. So that was why I got dropped. But to pick up, and yes, as Joya noted, and I will commit to here now, we'll definitely be sharing some of my own observations, sites that I saw, art, and inspirations from that trip, just in case it inspires any of you all similarly. So, but picking up where we kind of left off or where I dropped off, there were some points that we didn't quite touch upon in seeking to answer this question: why is Renaissance humanism an ideal, one of our ideals in philosophical liberalism? And why is it important just in general for humans to strive for? I started, I think, to kind of get into it, but in referencing looking back to the history of the Renaissance period in Florence and the like, and all those great creators, that they had really discovered or rediscovered, you might say, the wisdom of the ancients, that man was a being of, you might say, near infinite capacities, and that cultivating as many of those as possible in one single man made for a greater life. So, and that was certainly the example that many of the greatest creators of that period strived for. And we see it just in their own example. Leonardo da Vinci, the kind of apotheosis of the Renaissance human ideal and archetype, was a painter, an engineer, a scientist, an inventor, an entrepreneur, a philosopher, so many things, a naturist and kind of biologist, a kind of you could even say a kind of like dabbled in as a doctor, certainly at least in his studies of anatomy and the like. So he
Mathematician, all those things.
mathematician, exactly. So and on it goes. So I think one key just takeaway from that, from their inspiration and finding, arguably one we've lost in our hyper specialized modern era that we live in which we did talk about a little bit in part one, is just this realization that this capacity of human beings to be multi-talented, multifaceted, multi-valued, and practiced, it does exist. And so once you know that that isn't a possibility, as we've often said on many other facets of our discourse on human nature at its best, why wouldn't you want to strive for that? So that to me is perhaps the greatest insight that the men of and women of the Renaissance rediscovered, and one that is just as valid for us today as it was then, arguably even more valid today, given we've now since kind of regressed again, you might say, into a kind of hyper specialized era where people, really our whole society is set up now to kind of shoehorn human beings into a kind of one dimensionality, if you will, kind of the whole structure of education and vocational training and then career planning and just life structuring is kind of one path, one career, one specialty. And then even once you go into that career, it just gets ever more layered and layered of specialization within even that field. So, yes, there's still aspects of general knowledge and skill that get built, particularly in the earlier phases of life, but they don't last long and there's really not much emphasis on them. So to me, that's just kind of a great insight there that I think is worth highlighting. I'll pause there before moving on to some of the other points I had.
Yeah, well, I'll pick up and say definitely people should see what we said in part one about this, but I want to make the point that we're not just knocking specialization. I think the real goal is integrating both being a
Yes,
generalist
that's a
and a
good point.
specialist, because there's certainly value to specialization. Certainly what we know of the whole progress of capitalism. We're all for free markets in
Yes.
this show and in this project. And how markets work is precisely because human beings get to specialize, and our whole concept of the creator trader, the idea of trading with others who have specialized knowledge, specialized skills, specialized domain excellence. And I think there is even real value for a human being to do. You and I were recently even talking about Cal Newport and his phrase deep work. There's just so much value for a human being to do deep work. And so we definitely want to encourage everyone to go deep. And we're saying we also want to go broad. I've sometimes heard this referred to as being a T-shaped professional, the idea that you go deep in one domain but still have a lot of knowledge across a lot of domains. Although the way I like to think about this is even more being like a tooth comb, if you can imagine what a comb would look like
Mm,
with several
mm-hmm.
teeth. Maybe someone would broke a tooth comb, but the idea that you would have knowledge over a wide domain, but then still go deep, maybe with certain different levels of depth
Yep.
in different areas. But I'm realizing even this analogy ultimately falls apart, because when you think about it that way, you think about sort of each domain being its own separate little tooth, where I think what we know of the beauty of this model, and as we're going to discuss its connection to creativity, is what happens is as you go deep in all these domains, you start to find all the ways that they intersect and combine and come together. And that's
Mm-hmm.
really where the excitement and the beauty lies, is finding what happens when you go wide and then certain levels of depth, and you start finding those intersections and connections and patterns and using all of that to create something even new and better and unthinkable without having gone through that kind of integration.
Yeah, well said. And you're right to point out and clarify, I completely echo it, that we want it. This is really another case of the both and generalist and specialist. There's no doubt. I mean, the whole labor theory of specialization that Adam Smith first hit upon in 1776, and why, just a plug for us, why we chose that date so critical. Um, that is the foundation upon which our whole modern world, modern capitalist, industrial, technological world, that is the greatest marvel and period of human existence, that it exists upon. So definitely not trying to throw that baby out with the bathwater, so to speak. Of it really is. and even in my own life, I mean, I have my industry of expertise in architecture and real estate and finance. So, and that's, I guess you could say, is even three kind of fields that overlap in themselves. That's partly why I think I even chose that field as mine of interest, because it overlaps. But the reality is, every field of human endeavor and knowledge has some form of integration of many other fields. So inherently, yes, even when you specialize in a field of endeavor or inquiry, you are still touching upon many others. But I do think there is, and this is why we highlight Renaissance human as an ideal in our statement and are really spending time to go deep on it here in these two sessions, is that there really is something to building up a kind of expertise in many different areas of life and fields of endeavor or inquiry, and I personally at least would like to champion, because it's certainly something I'm striving to build in my own life, a future model that I think begets greater freedom, flourishing, and greatness for individuals and society at large, of more people doing the both and pursuing kind of their field of primary specialization, you might say, or passion, to all use as a kind of synonymously here in this context, but also going as deep as they can or desire to in many other areas, whether or not they kind of directly implicate on or benefit their primary field of endeavor or not. And we'll talk here in a second of why I think that's important, and some models even we can give you to kind of how you can think of like the different fields that are open to human beings. But that is, I just know in my own life, I've been working for 20 years now out of university, my own studies. And for the majority of that period, it very much was the kind of specialization path that I was on, got increasingly specialized. It did wonders for me personally. It helped me advance in so many dimensions in my life and my career path. But then I kind of hit my own plateau in a way of how I could leverage that specialization. And I saw, frankly, that it got even more specialized. I mean, just to be more concrete with the example, I was running a subtype of properties, commercial office properties within the business portfolio that I was a part of in my last job before I broke off to become an entrepreneur. And that was kind of my sole focus for the last few years of my time in the corporate world. And COVID pandemic hit and basically made office buildings obsolete, certainly for a time. And so, when you only do and invest in one type of property in one field of endeavor, and if they go belly up, or the culture and economy changes, then you kind of can find yourself stuck a little bit. So, I think that was, in so many ways, my experience, I know, was mirrored across many other industries for many other reasons, but that highlighted for me even the kind of the dangers, if you will, of over specialization without having kind of breadth and depth in other fields that I could draw upon. So even in my own life and career, and as I shifted to entrepreneurship, I mean, I had many reasons for doing that, but in my efforts to do that over the last 2 years, I also have made a conscious decision to also build up knowledge and skills in some other areas that I didn't have in the first 20 years of my career. And I will just say that even in doing that, it has already started to benefit my own creativity and helped me make new insights and connections and integrations, as you mentioned, that I would have never made if I wasn't starting to expose myself to, you know, performing arts and art and engineering studies and technology studies and software, hardware, all these other areas that I've since been working on. So that to me is another reason why this ideal is important, because beyond helping build this both and generalist specialist capacity, it also, I think, helps build an integrative complexity to your thinking and your worldview that allows you to be more creative and have greater impact on the world around you.
And let's just say it allows you to be more fully human. So, if
Mm,
we're sharing some of our personal stories, I feel like this stage of my life, I have a certain perspective on this because I am homeschooling a preschooler. And preschool is that beautiful age in our school system where it's sort of accepted that all humans are essentially Renaissance humans, because in preschool, you get exposed to everything. And we want our preschoolers exposed to everything. We want them to learn their letters and become literate. We want them to learn their numbers and start to develop their mathematical skills. We want them to do art and music. We're starting to introduce some concepts of scientific experiments. We're starting to look at geography. We're talking about governments. We're exposing them to all these different fields because we're realizing that these little babies are now becoming little humans. And we want these little humans to have this opportunity to try all of these different things, to do cooking and to be outside in the garden and to be doing physical exercise and to try all of these things. And I think it is certainly important when you're young to have that opportunity to try things, to find out where you might have a certain passion or interest so that you can go deep. But to your point, the unfortunate thing is that we live in a society where, as you progress through the school system, you eventually have to pick a major, you have to pick a career, and then within that career, you get even more and more specialized. And while there is some wonderful value that can come from this specialization, as we've said, we unfortunately lose the beauty of what it is when you're 3 and 4 years old and you get to be a full human who gets to do all of the things.
mm.
And, as someone who's in their 40s now, I wish more 40-year-olds were like more 4-year-olds and got to have fun just getting to explore everything because we are fully human and we have these capacities to enjoy art and science and music and physical activity and all the different spheres. And so maybe this is where we can maybe even get into our different models. So in part one of this, I got to share the model I've come up with, my 8 pillars as I think of them of the Renaissance human ideal. I can reiterate them here, and I think we're definitely going to share some notes. And then you have some thoughts about the Chris Bush version of the Wheel of Life, which is a traditional coaching concept, which I love the way you've just made it your own and really drawn out, I think, the Renaissance aspects here. Maybe there's something you want to say before we get into sharing our models here.
Yeah, thank you. I would echo and maybe just emphasize by adding on to what you said earlier about um, making us more fully human and kind of the 40-year-old example there of I know even in my own life friends and family relationships of many people in their 40s, 30s, 40s, 50s, beyond who have struggled either in their past or their present about what to do at that phase in their life, or a sense that maybe they never did find their quote unquote passion or this or that. And to me, the more fully human we are, meaning the more well-rounded and Renaissance human like we are, the more touch points you have with the various aspects of being human to draw upon and start to see, get answers to those questions that I think sadly far too many humans do struggle with because the structure of our society that kind of forces you into kind of careerism mode and the specialization that goes attends to that kind of not only beats out of people, but maybe doesn't even ever allow them to explore. And so to me, that's just another uh, plug for why this specific model or ideal, the Renaissance human one, can be so helpful. And so to that end, yes, as you noted, I have one of the tools that helped me kind of shift my focus as I began my entrepreneurial journey towards a more generalist perspective was this tool called the Wheel of Life. My husband, among speaking talking about Renaissance humans, he is certainly a man of many skills, talents, and interests and abilities. And one of those is being a coach. And so he was the one who introduced me to this tool of the Wheel of Life. It's a common tool that basically you create a wheel, and it's generally divided into kind of 6 to 8 categories or slices of the pie. You basically slice up the wheel into a pie or spokes. To keep the wheel metaphor precise, I guess it'd be spokes of the wheel, or we'll call it a pie, whatever you want to call it. Use your metaphor. If you're hungry or you just need to get somewhere, take your pick. But but 6 to 8 are the usual categories, and they're kind of the traditional ones of finances or money, health and wellness, family, relationships, friends, career, kind of taking the various aspects of life, even what you might consider kind of the typical modern life, and just kind of bracketing them, categorizing them into these slices of the wheel. And then you kind of use it to rank how you feel you're doing in each of those levels. It's therefore used as kind of a device to help people gauge and see, based on their desires and goals, where they want to kind of focus on, or where they've been neglecting and need to focus on more. So that's the typical me being me and wanting to kind of go above and beyond overachiever type. I was not satisfied with the kind of standard template, so I created my own, and it ultimately came down to, like, I think 15 or 16 slices of the pie, because I really wanted to drill in on what to me were the nuances or even missing categories of importance to me. And so I'll read through those, and then I further kind of made essentially like 3 levels of ranking, because as I went through it, I was realizing, okay, how am I ranking this exactly? Like, what's the standard of measurement or value that I'm kind of ranking? And I ultimately realized that I was trying to rank not only where I felt I stood in terms of satisfaction in each category, but also the goals that I had and how well I had been achieving them. And then kind of the energy that I wanted to put into them, or that I got out of them. So I kind of created a three kind of wheel ranking within each of the 15 categories. So for me, I kind of divided it into kind of, so going around my wheel, I had marriage slash romance and sex, which I think is a critical category. Creative work or career, which I kind of bracketed as the same. Family, friendships and relationships, social life and acquaintances, health and fitness, philosophy and spirituality, um, learning and personal development, art, architecture, design, and I can't even read my own handwriting. So, but that one was specific to me, given my interest. This was basically a specific of creative outlet on my art, architecture, and design interests. Rest, recreation, and hobbies, politics, activism, and causes, money and finances, travel and explorations, and then other creative outlets or ideation. So those were my categories of it. And you can then see it kind of divides life into all these many different domains of activity and interest, and then you can rank it however you will. So I'll share that as a kind of addendum to go with Joya's eight pillars. We were joking offline before we jumped on that she's got the pillars, I've got the wheels. So depending on, whether you need to go somewhere or whatever, you can
Or build up your edifice
or build up your edifice, you can use either one. But that's the idea. And
or
so,
eat a pizza.
or pizza, or eat pizza if you're hungry. Exactly. So that's the idea. And to me, it even just immediately helped me identify where I felt I was lacking in energy, commitment, goal setting, whatever, goal achieving, and then helped me reorient. And it certainly then also helped me create a richer life, which I think is another key takeaway. I think part of why we even idolize the Renaissance period and the people of that period is there's a certain awe and greatness that attends to pursuing excellence in so many different domains. And I think we even kind of idolize and nostalgize that period. It, we kind of say rose-colored glasses in a way, because there's a sense that they had much richer and exciting lives. And I would dare argue that a big reason for that was precisely for this reason, that they were pursuing activity and excellence in so many different aspects of life.
So maybe for those who didn't get a chance to see part one or haven't seen it in a while, I'll just reiterate what my 8 pillars are. Or really, I identified them as 8 roles. I eventually categorized them into different roles that I thought every human ought to take. And my 8 were the entrepreneur in the broad sense of entrepreneurs, as we've been discussing it even on the show, athlete to this point of fitness and health. The one name that I could not figure out how to say it quite right, but I just had relationship maker or builder to emphasize the importance of the relationships that we create and how important that is for the human experience. I had the financier to get this important point about the role that money plays in all of our lives, regardless of what the career path you choose. I had the statesperson, which is obviously hugely relevant to the liberalism aspect of our philosophical liberal project. I had the scientist and the artist, and then finally the philosopher as my 8. So I've noticed, even just contrasting your wheel with my pillars, that things that were not in my pillars that are in your wheel are things like education and travel, which are things that are actually part of my career. But I guess maybe because to me, they're even just so ingrained into how I approach all of these, with sort of that mindset of continuous learning and continuous exploration, and travel
Mm.
as the ultimate embodiment of that. But it is kind of interesting how that all works out.
I love it. And well, and that's the point, that between, I mean, these are just our two mental models for this, but and I'd like to think between the two of us, just given our general method and approach to many topics and conceptualizations, that we probably covered a lot of the ground, or you could say a big chunk of most human activities could fall under one or more of our wheel pieces or pillars, so to speak. But they're certainly, I'm sure, not fully comprehensive. So there's others here that could fit in here as well. But I think that it at least kind of speaks to what we're trying to get to here, is that there are many manifestations of human capacity: the physical, the mental, the emotional, etc. And the more we kind of think about human life as encompassing all of those components and capacities, and then work to build them up and practice them to whatever degrees, relative weightings and degrees interest us, that's really where I think the individuality comes in to play. Is you get to kind of, you can think of them as ingredients, and then you get to choose which proportions you want in your life based on your own interests and passions. And it can change over time, but it at least gives you a framework for thinking about it, that's the much richer life that is possible for each of us when we kind of can see it and practice it in that way. And the only last point that I would have made of why I think this ideal is helpful, and again, just borrowing from my own experience of how even my life has evolved in the 2 years since I started using the Wheel of Life model, is that I think, and to tie it to our project even, is that I think when you start to see your life in a more comprehensive and certainly much wider, broader, deeper capacities, it kind of inherently sets you on a path that makes the achievement of our North Star, Lodestar values of freedom, flourishing, and greatness that much more easier to achieve. Because as we've identified and outlined in detail in those prior sessions on those three core values, there's a lot of human value and virtue that goes into kind of achieving and operating under those three states. And I think the Renaissance human conception of human life, of what it means to be most fully human, kind of encompasses or touches upon a lot of the elements that go into each of those three core values.
I would say one other commonality here. Well, Really, I two things that I think we both have in common here that I'm realizing in this conversation. The first, a little bit of a side, I just realized as we've been talking that you and I each both married individuals who are Renaissance human men, which gets to how important this
Mm,
aspect of human life is for both of us. That was sort of a key consideration as we're thinking about who we're going to partner with
for
for life.
sure.
But I think the other key consideration that you and I both share in thinking about this is the connection to creativity as well. And we've obviously talked about the creator trader ideal, and maybe this is how they ultimately combine. Because as you've been alluding to here, that the whole purpose of this is not even just to explore all of these different aspects of life, to just sit in your ivory tower and soak in all of the information. The ultimate goal of all of this is to be able to take these different domains of knowledge and skill and wisdom and experience and be able to create something new out of it, create
Mm,
something that is
mhm.
your own, make that contribution back to the world. So again, just another beautiful example of the Maslow idea of self-actualization and self-transcendence, of how as you self actualize by exploring your potential in all of these different areas, and how you're going to bring together your slices of the pie in, or pillars of the building, whichever metaphor
Mhm.
you want to take, you're going to you even though you're going to be exploring different areas, how you do this will always be your own as you're putting together your own potential. And then the ultimate goal of that is to put it all together in a way that allows you to create something that you can contribute to the world at large. And that, I think, is ultimately the beautiful spiral that comes out of it, that creates a life that is meaningful and rich and fully human.
Wonderfully put. I love that conclusion. Yes, absolutely. I mean, it was in the middle of my 5 points of why this ideal matters, but I would probably say yes, it's perhaps the most important one, at least as it pertains to our unique vision of the creator trader as the ultimate archetype of human nature at our best is that it enables that kind of original creative creation, that original creation that helps impact and move forward and progress the world forward. So yeah, definitely well said. And that I think then, unless you had anything else you wanted to add, we can jump into the call to action. And what better way than to use one or both of the models we just put
Or create your own,
or
even. That
or
might
create
even
your
be
own.
the
I
ideal
like
third solution.
yes, exactly. So if you don't need a wheel, you're not hungry for pizza, and you don't need to build a building, then come up with your own framework for thinking about the many different dimensions of human creativity and ability and capacity or values, and or use the wheel of life that we're going to share, or Joya's 8 pillars slash roles, and use one or more of those models to kind of evaluate your own life and where you stand on them, and kind of the pick the top 2 to 3 of the wheel pieces or building pillars that where you feel you're most deficient in, you might say, or I guess our least kind of lowest ranking, and then kind of hone in on those as and come up with perhaps your own action plan of how you can start to make progress on increasing the score and the activation or the focus on those 3 areas of your life. That's where it starts.
Mhm. Well, I can't wait to get started. And well, maybe we'll even have to share our own as we think through our own different models, and maybe we can even borrow from each other's models and use that
Yeah,
as
I
a
would.
jumping off
Yeah, I
point.
think that's a great idea. And actually, I it's now been 2 years since I last did that exercise, so I think it's a great reason for me to I was planning to kind of revisit it, and anyways, 2 years felt like a good check-in point. I mean, you can certainly do it much more frequently than that, and I encourage people to do so. But I kind of was checking in along the way of these past 2 years, but it frankly did provide me a great guidepost. And I will say, just as an example, one of in my top 3 areas where I was most efficient or lacking or scored lowest, travel and exploration was one, and I have definitely in the last 2 years totally zoom that up. So that's just a plug for the practical application of these tools to really helping you kind of reorient and shift the focus of your life if you want to.
Wonderful. Well, and that wraps up then the Renaissance human ideal, and we'll see everyone again. Well, everyone will have to look out for the special bonus episode tidbits from Italy, and then we'll see everyone again in 2 weeks.
All right. Look forward to it.